Hey there, greetings everyone. Welcome, Kingdom Ekklesia of America. Today we have a very special show for you. Today is the first day of spring, and it is Nowruz, which is the Persian New Year, and it's also Shabbat. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I find it really amazing how all three of these are culminating together on the same day. I think this is a little God wink. I think God's looking down and he is pleased to see the Iranian people getting freed from the Islamic regime. So keep praying for them. We are not out of that war at all, as you know, and it's going to take a lot of prayers, a lot of decrees, and a lot of you and I continuing to stand in the gap for the Iranian people. Now, the Lord pressed upon my heart to start praying into Lebanon. And so, who better to bring on other than my own in-house geopolitical commentator and Middle East expert, my very own husband, Michael Korine, who happens to be from Iran, but he also has family all over the Middle East. And so, Michael, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you coming on to shed light on Lebanon so that we can make prayers and decrees that are really targeted and so that our group can have a really firm understanding of what's going on in Lebanon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Louise. I'm glad to be a part of this.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay, so Michael, if you don't mind, let's jump right into it. There's so much going on with Lebanon. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, Lebanon was always in the news. My dad would come home from work and put on Peter Jennings, World News Tonight, or all of those shows with Walter Cronkite. What was it? That CBS Evening News. And it always seems like Lebanon was front and center. What the heck is going on in Lebanon? Why is there so much conflict? Can you clue us in and shed some light?
Sure. Look, in order to really understand why Lebanon is the way it is, you've got to go back and look at it from a historical perspective and see how events have shaped the country over the centuries, over the past decades. Believe it or not, the biggest problem that the country has always faced is the fact that it's a very small country with so many different sects, so many different religions, and so many different groups of people that have constantly over time been vying for power and fighting each other for power. Um, Now, if you go back in history, Lebanon has always been primarily dominated by Christians. So throughout the centuries, there was I believe the largest population of Christians in the Middle East were in Lebanon. And now, if you go back in ancient times, Lebanon generally has been ruled by empire after empire. So you had the Romans, the Greeks, the Assyrians, just throughout history. It's been one empire after the other, culminating in the rule of the Ottomans back in the Ottoman Empire during the 1500s up until the beginning of the 20th century in World War One. So it's been a very complicated sort of type of arrangement that they've always had between all these different sects. There's uh, numerous religions that are in play, not just religions, but you've got within the religions also a lot of divisions. So you've got primarily Maronite Christians. These were a sect that believed in a saint called Saint Maron. You have Greek Orthodox Christians, you've got Russian Orthodox Christians, you've got Catholics in Lebanon, and even though they're all Christians, they have their own divisions, and they didn't always get along with each other, and they vied for power against each other. Same thing with the Muslims. You had Shiite Muslims, Sunni Muslims, you've got Sufi Muslims. You've had Druze, which was more of an esoteric sect, part of Islam, but very different in their belief system. And so all of these, and before I move on, I think at one point I've read that there was anywhere up to about 18 to 20 different sects throughout the country. And if you looked at the sort of overall religious groups, the Christians always dominated. And as part of in 1930 actually was the last time that there was a census in the area, and about 51% of the population was Christian, if you look at the entire Christians. So, they always held more power. They always were dominant in society. And but throughout the years, throughout the decades and centuries, there were always conflicts between the Christians and the Muslims, everybody vying for power, wanting more power. Um, and The fact that they were governed always by external forces didn't help. Now, in the 20th century, early 20th century, in World War One, the Ottomans, who were aligned with the Germans, lost the war. And when they lost the war, the entire empire collapsed. And at the time, the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations back in the 1920s, um, gave the rule of the region to both the British and the French. So the French took over what was called the French Mandate, and that covered Syria and what modern day Syria and Lebanon. And the British basically were controlling the Palestine, or the old Palestine precursor to Israel, and also the what's considered today to be Jordan. And that was done primarily because the French had a relationship with the Christians in Lebanon, long-standing relationship. They spoke, they all spoke French. They had French education, so they always considered themselves to be the protectors of the Christians in Lebanon, whereas the British uh, basically had more of a relationship with the Palestinians, and more of a presence back to dating back years and years and centuries when they were fighting the Egyptians. Um, so essentially, in 1920, the French mandate was established. The French took over the rule. And that went on until 1943, when Lebanon was declared as an independent state. And during that same year, they put together some kind of an agreement amongst the various sects. It was an unwritten agreement, call it a constitution, in how to formulate the governance of the country. And the way they did it was dividing it by the various sects. So the majority Christians got the presidency, and with that came the commander in chief of the armed forces. So they controlled both the presidency and the armed forces of the country. The Sunnis, which were the second largest group, got command of the prime ministership, and by decree also the Shiites got the speakership of the parliament. So initially, it was meant to give each of them a major say in the affairs of the government. But unfortunately, because the various sects constantly over the past decades and centuries have always fought each other and vied for more power against each other, that system never came to become a perfected system, and it never really worked. Ever since independence up until modern day, you still have those divisions. You still have the all the problems that have emanated from this type of division within the country, and they've never been able to solve that.
Right.
Um, so that's
So,
that's been the crux of the problem ever since,
right.
and that's what's been driving where Lebanon is today, and why you always hear it on the news.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Well, thank you for painting that picture. And I understand that you prepared a PowerPoint of, a short PowerPoint for our viewers today, maybe for them to look at visually. If you wouldn't mind to pop that up, that would be great. Are you
Sure.
able to share your screen? Oh, perfect.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So
so
basically here is you look at the chronology of events where they go from all the various empires, and then they go to the Ottoman rule between 1516 and 1918. Then in 1920 you had the French Mandate, and of course in 1943 you had the National Pact and independence.
So during the independence of Lebanon, is that when the sectarian system came into play, that unwritten constitution, or did it happen before then?
It was done in 1943,
Okay,
and it was the same year that they actually were given their independence.
got it. And it doesn't seem like the Druze were given much say in the governance.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because bef when the French took over, let me go back a little bit more in history. Okay,
Sure.
during the Ottoman rule, what was known as Lebanon was really called the Emirate of Mount Lebanon, and that was a smaller portion of today's Lebanon. And the Emirate of Mount Lebanon was actually itself was divided into two sections. You had the northern section, which was run by the Christians, and you had the southern district, which was run by the Druze at the time. Interestingly enough, when the French mandate was established, the French wanted to sort of expand the focus of the governance of the territory, and they wanted the Muslims to have more say because they were continuously having a lot of unrest where the Muslims really wanted to get their more rights. And what happened was that they expanded the scope of Mount Lebanon and the emirate there to what was referred to as Greater Lebanon, and that essentially took it up to the northern border of Syria, where Lebanon met Syria, today's Lebanon, and also the southern border of where they are with Israel today. And with that, the population became much more reflective of the way it looks today. Interestingly enough, when they came up with the National Pact, as you mentioned earlier, the Druze were left out of the picture. And that's because they had become such a small segment of the population in Lebanon.
And, you know, from my own knowledge of Lebanon, I understand that Lebanon has been changing dramatically over the last 100 years, particularly since what I believe, since Israel became a nation.
Yes.
Um, you're seeing less Druze, less Christians, more Muslims, and especially more Shiites. So, you know, I guess we'll get into that, but let's continue now with a little more of the history. So we left off with the French Mandate. Now the French Mandate ends. Lebanon gets free. We have this sectarian system put in place, no written constitution. The Druze lose a lot of their voice in the government. So what happens next, Michael?
Well, let me just correct one thing that you said.
Sure.
Okay. With independence, Lebanon did not become free. They wanted to get free, and they thought that independence would solve all their problems, and it didn't, as you'll see. So if you look at the post-independence period of Lebanon, Um, the problems practically started right away. I mean, they became independent in 1943. By 1948, Israel got its independence, and of course, we had the War of Independence there, and we all know what happened. At the time in 1947, the United States agreed on a partition plan for Palestine between the Jews and the Arabs. And while the Jews accepted the division, the Palestinians rejected it, the Arab states rejected it, and they thought that they could drive the Jews into the sea. So essentially, what happened was that Israel won that war of independence, and a lot of Palestinians, some of them were forced to leave, others chose to leave, and most of them were told to leave by most of the Arab states because they thought that they would be able to attack Israel and drive the Jews into the sea. So where did all these Palestinians go? Well, a lot of them headed north into Lebanon, and a lot of them headed east into Jordan. And unfortunately, all these displaced Palestinians were placed into refugee camps, which were controlled by the United Nations, by a part of the United Nations called UNRWA, which has also been on the news a lot these days, and I'll get into that later. But unfortunately, the Palestinians were always treated as refugees. 75 years later, they're still treated as refugees. And so everywhere they've went, they've really caused a lot of problems because they were not happy with the arrangements that they were living in. They have constantly wanted to go back, take over their homes again. And so every location that they've been in, whether it's been Jordan or partially in Syria or Lebanon, they've always used that as a base to attack Israel and drawing those countries into the conflict. Um, so in 1948, a lot of Palestinians migrated into Lebanon. That caused a lot of social pressure. They all basically moved into bases in South Lebanon along the border of Israel, and they were conducting terrorist activities, essentially drawing Lebanon into the conflict with Israel, even though they never had any kind of a border issue historically. Um, in addition to that, so that was the first wave of the Palestinians that went to Lebanon. And that was, you can call it the start of the major shift in the population. So they increased the Sunni population significantly. In the 1950s, we saw a decade that was marred by a lot of unrest. The population mix started shifting, and again, like historically, there was a lot of problems between the different sects. Most of the Lebanese did not want the Palestinians there. The Palestinians were trying to assert themselves. Then came 1967, the Six-Day War, where Israel, went in and took over the West Bank of the Jordan River, the Golan Heights from Syria, and also the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, in a Six-Day War. And so more Palestinians were displaced. More of them ended up going into Jordan and also into Lebanon. So that was the second wave that hit Lebanon. Unfortunately, this happened to be during a decade in the 60s when, for the first time in a very, very long time, the Lebanese started enjoying prosperity. Their economy was growing. They became a tourist hub for a very for a very long time. People used to refer to Beirut as the Paris of the Middle East. It was absolutely a beautiful, beautiful port, beautiful beaches, very modern. It was an example in all of the Middle East. So when during this decade a lot of Arab money came in, their banking system started growing. Lebanon became a banking hub, and so there was a lot of prosperity happening. Unfortunately, things took a different turn again in the 70s. So in 1970, the Palestinians that were located in Jordan revolted against the Hashemite kingdom. They wanted to overthrow the monarchy, and claim the entirety of Jordan as their state. Of course, the Jordanians were able to repel them. They defeated the Palestinians on the streets. Believe it or not, a lot of that was with the help of Israel, which did not want to see the Hashemite kingdom fall. And so again, there was another wave of Palestinians that now were expelled from Jordan and they went to Lebanon. With them along was the leadership of the Palestinians, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was run by Yasser Arafat, who we all know as a major terrorist, who conducted a lot of terrorist activities during the 70s up until the 80s. So this sort of changed the dynamics in the 70s. It created more conflict. The Lebanese did not want the Palestinians there. When the PLO started taking over those refugee camps along the Israeli border in the north, they increased their terrorist activities across the border, and the Lebanese just didn't want that. And that was sort of the seed that started the civil war, essentially, that affected Lebanon for the next 15 years.
So, and I'm sure at that point Israel must have gotten involved with all the attacks against them, no
Yeah,
doubt.
yeah. There was a lot of conflict going back and forth during that
Okay.
time.
So now jump forward to the Lebanese Civil War, okay, because that left deep scars, and that's all I heard growing up.
Mhm.
That's all I heard for about 15 years about was the civil war in Lebanon. What were the core drivers, in addition to the PLO and the economy falling apart? And has Lebanon even been able to recover from that civil war? And if so, to what extent, or like what happened there?
It has, and it hasn't, and I'll go through that.
Okay.
The actual trigger that started the Civil War, look at it like a matchbox. Lebanon was like a matchbox. All it took was for one matchstick to get lit, and it just ignited everything. It literally started in the port city of Tripoli. At the time, there was a Christian president. He wanted to take over a lot of business enterprises throughout the country, and with that came the shipping industry in Tripoli. So he was doing whatever he could to basically take over a lot of the businesses over there. And the population in Tripoli happens to be more Muslim than it is Christian. And so there was one time when there was a very large demonstration, and he actually showed up, and some Palestinian terrorists tried to assassinate him. and they shot through the crowd and killed a number of Christians. And that led to some revenge actions by the Christians. So a few days later, the Christians attacked a bus where they thought was full of Palestinian terrorists, and it turned out to be Palestinian civilians, and a whole bunch of women and children got killed. And with that, basically, they started fighting amongst the two factions. Then, of course, the Sunnis came into the war. The Druze came into the war because you had a whole bunch of these militias, all of them waiting for that trigger. They all had arms. They all had their little armies. They were all loyalties to various families, and everybody started fighting with each other. And of course, that was the start of the Civil War. Unfortunately, that civil war lasted for 15 years. It started in 1975 and it ended in 1990. And during these 15 years, the entire country was completely devastated. There was fighting everywhere. And in 1976, you had the Syrian army that was formally asked by the government really to intervene because there was always a very close brotherly sisterly relationship between the Syrians and the Lebanese. Of course, the Syrians were also part of the French Mandate before they got their independence. And so the army literally came into Lebanon, took over the entire country. Of course, not South Lebanon, because of course that would have brought the ire of Israel. And let me just take this back. Sorry about that. Okay. Um, all right.
I think yeah, there.
So you had the Syrian military that was now involved in the fighting, and they were fighting everybody. I mean, allegiances were going all over the place. At one point, they started out supporting the Christians, and then, of course, there were times when they were supporting the Muslims, and it was just a hodgepodge of everybody fighting each other, destroying the country, and unfortunately destroying Beirut. That Paris of the Middle East turned into a pile of rubble. And during the Civil War, actually, what happened was that Beirut got divided permanently, between East Beirut and West Beirut, sort of like we used to have East Berlin, West Berlin. We now have, we've had East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem. I mean, it was just a nightmare because West Jerusalem was taken over by the Muslims. East Jerusalem was Christian. We had a lot of displacement, people moving out, moving in. I mean, it was just terrible. And the entire city and the entire country actually turned into a big pile of rubble. And there was a lot of terrorism. Uh, you had, international forces that were going in apart from the Syrians. At one point, you had American forces, and then they had to leave. At some point, you had French forces. They were driven out. And unfortunately, the next big issue that happened was in 1978, where again the PLO decided to attack Israel, and they hijacked the bus, and they killed a whole bunch of people on this bus, and held this bus for about a week, I believe. Interestingly enough, we many years later, in the 70s, we actually met, my family and I met the driver, and he was, very passionately talking about what happened during that time. But as a result of that operation, Israel ended up invading South Lebanon and fighting a terrible fight over a period of time with the PLO. And then, once they kind of cleaned up the situation temporarily, they withdrew back. And again, the PLO decided to attack Israel in 1982. They had left some roadside bombs along the border. And at one point, a military jeep from the Israeli Defense Forces went on one of the mines, exploded. Two people lost their lives. One guy, unfortunately, lost his leg. Who again, I ended up meeting many years later and skiing with him in Vermont.
You're skiing together, one-legged guy, and you're skiing.
One-legged guy, and he skied better than I did. And I used to be a very good skier. So
Michael, I just want to interrupt you for a second. And this
yeah,
is for the younger people who may not know who they are, but just say who the PLO is for clarity purposes, please.
sure. Back in 19 after 1967, the Palestinians, I don't know why the screen keeps popping back and
It's
forth,
okay. Don't worry. It's fun.
but the Palestinians created, and because they were set up of a variety of, you can call, terrorist groups, um, and they needed one group to sort of take over all of them. And so they created what's called the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was run by Yasser Arafat. And by the way, interestingly enough, a lot of the Palestinians are not even quote unquote Palestinians. Most of them were from Egypt. Yasser Arafat, who started the PLO and ran the organization for about 20 or 30 years after that, he was also born in Egypt. He was not a Palestinian. And so, but anyway, they created the PLO. The PLO was as well known in the 70s and 80s. They were one of the major terrorist organizations around the world. They were doing a lot of hijackings of airliners. They were attacking Israel continuously, taking hostages, assassinating people around the world. And it was a big problem. And they were, at the time, they were being supported by a variety of Arab governments who were fighting Israel. And also, all of this became mired into the East-West issue between the Soviet Union and the United States. So you had the Soviets through their KGB, their intelligence agency. They were supporting the PLO a lot, arming them, and essentially, everything was part of this global Cold War between the United States and Israel. The U.S. primarily was supporting Israel, and of course the Soviet Union was supporting the Arab states and the PLO. Bit of a digression. So in answer to your question, the PLO, a terrorist organization, uh, fully armed, was now dragging the Lebanese country into the Arab-Israeli war by constantly attacking Israel.
Wow, what a mess. So what happens next, Michael? Oh my gosh.
Well, what happens next is we get into the sort of the next wave, which was during the Civil War. And so we've talked about the intervention. We had the 78 war, we had the 82 war. And one of the byproducts of the 82 war was in 1982, the Iranians
Wait,
or the
I'm going to
Islamic
interrupt
regime.
you. Hold
Sorry,
on.
go ahead.
I apologize, but
Sure.
back up because 82 saw the expulsion of the PLO. So just let's
Oh,
talk a little bit about the Lebanon War and tell
sure.
everyone about that. Just for posterity's sake. Let's
Okay.
okay.
So in 1982, when Israel went into Lebanon, and at the time Ronald Reagan was president and the Secretary of State was General Al Haig, they had a very close relationship with Israel, and they actually gave the green light for Israel to invade South Lebanon. And what Israel was hoping to do in that invasion essentially was to clean up South Lebanon and get rid of the PLO, which they succeeded in doing. So Israeli forces took over all of South Lebanon. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the map of Lebanon, you've got a natural border between what's considered to be South Lebanon and the rest of Lebanon, and that's a pretty large river called the Litani River. So Israel reached the Litani River, so it cleaned up all of that South Lebanon portion, and actually, for the first time ever, crossed over the Litani River and went all the way to Beirut and pushed the Palestinians and the PLO into West Beirut, and they surrounded Beirut. And over a period of, I think it was about a week, maybe even longer, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they kept bombing West Beirut, and they literally surrounded and choked off the Muslims and all the Palestinians. And when finally a ceasefire was declared, it was only under condition that the PLO would leave Lebanon. So they literally expelled the PLO, took Yasser Arafat and his whole gang of terrorists, put them all on ships in the port of Beirut, and shipped them off to Tunisia.
Mhm. You're
And
out of here.
what was that?
You're out of here. They got rid
Get
of
out of here. Absolutely. They got out of them. They got rid of a big cancer. And at that point, over sort of a period of time afterwards, Israel ended up withdrawing their forces. They went back, but they, even though they withdrew from South Lebanon, south of Litani River, what they ended up doing was they they brought in a militia, primarily of Christians, and they created an army called the South Lebanese Army, which directly was operated under the influence of Israel. And the South Lebanese Army basically ran South Lebanon de facto with Israeli protection over a period of another, wow, until 2006. And so at this point, you had an Israeli de facto presence in South Lebanon. The PLO was out, and the Lebanese were continuously fighting, or in the rest of Lebanon, throughout the 80s. Now, in 1982, something else happened. You had the Islamic regime in Iran that smelled an opportunity. Of course, Iran and Israel are not bordering states, and I hope people know that since the beginning of the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic regime had always said and promised that eventually they would destroy the state of Israel. So we all know the big chants on the streets. There was always death to America, which was the great Satan, and then there was death to Israel, which was little Satan. And with that, they decided that they wanted to turn Lebanon into their presence and their frontier right on the border of Israel. So they created this militia out of the Shiite population of Lebanon called Hezbollah. And that's when Hezbollah emerged. Hezbollah actually means party of God. And they're primarily Shiites, and most of them were actually from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard of Iran. And they integrated themselves into Lebanese society, and through continuous funding and arming by the Islamic regime, uh, eventually they became the most powerful group, most powerful, call it army in Lebanon, even more powerful than the Lebanese army. So that started the next wave of problems that hit the Lebanese country and made life essentially very difficult for them. So that was pretty much what was going on in the 80s. Finally, in 1990, everybody had had enough. 15 years of civil war had completely destroyed the economy, destroyed everything about Lebanon. And they finally came to their senses. There was an accord called the Taif Accords, where the Syrians and the international community were negotiated with all the various sects. They decided to stop the war, and they went back to the previous arrangement. But now the dynamics were very different because the demographics had changed. During the Civil War, a lot of the Christians left Lebanon.
Hmm.
The Muslim population increased substantially. And of course, the presence of Hezbollah had benefited the Shiites. So they were growing and they were demanding more. And so the Taif Accords, while they stopped the civil war, they started a new era of more unrest and more infighting, although not physical, between all the different sects in Lebanon.
Wow. So it seems like Lebanon never catches a break. Just hearing about this 15-year civil war, I'm like, I feel exhausted and I'm only hearing about it. So I can only imagine what the poor Lebanese people have been experiencing all these decades.
Sure.
And then you have the rise of Hezbollah, and let's face it, they're affecting Lebanon's ability to operate as a sovereign state. So, can you go into that as well and touch on that for the viewers?
Sure. So, like I said, in 1990, the war stopped, the civil war stopped, but Hezbollah kept growing. The Iranians had been arming them to the teeth, and they'd been giving them a lot of money. And over time, what they did was they started concentrating more on integrating themselves into Lebanese society and in essence taking over Lebanese society. In 1992, for the first time, there was an election that's where Hezbollah actually won seats in parliament. So now they went from being a militia to a political party. And then by 2005, a series of events happened which integrated them more and gave them even more power. At the time, there was a Sunni prime minister. His name was Rafiq Hariri. He was very, very popular amongst the Lebanese, including the Christians. And he was sort of, creating waves against Hezbollah. And then one day, lo and behold, he was assassinated. And all the various groups in Lebanon started pointing the fingers at Hezbollah. Hezbollah denied it. Nobody really ever got to the bottom of it. They started a lot of investigations, but that started a lot of anger and a lot of divisions within the society again. And at the same time, with the assassination, Hezbollah started even further consolidating their power, having been rid of a government that was trying to go against them. And they started consolidating their position, and they turned into a major political force. They had formed a number of foundations. They were setting up hospitals. They were setting up schools. So they were trying to become a lot more altruistic and a lot more philanthropic in their efforts to win over the population of Lebanon, and they succeeded. They succeeded because a lot of people accepted the fact that they now were not just a major power that they could get rid of, but had also were able to bring in a lot of resources to start improving the infrastructure in Lebanon.
Sure. I remember people were looking upon them favorably. I mean, they were basically buying up loyalty. They were fixing infrastructure,
Yeah,
providing for the public, and people were seeing them as heroes at the time.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, then came 2006. Now, in 2006, uh, again, a war broke out between Hezbollah and Israel. Again, because they were creating a lot of issues on the border, and they were arming up to a very large part with a lot of missiles. They were threatening the existence of Israel, and this huge war broke out. And as a result, Israel again, created a lot of harm to Hezbollah, but did not defeat them. And as part of the ceasefire to end the war and international pressure that was coming upon both parties, the Israel, they stopped the war, but one of the conditions was that they would give up South Lebanon, disband the South Lebanese army, and basically go back to the original border. And with that, part of the agreement through an actual UN resolution was that Hezbollah, for Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, Hezbollah had to completely disband and not take over South Lebanon. So the Israelis said fine, Hezbollah said fine, the Lebanese government said fine. They came to the agreement, they stopped the war, Israel withdrew, Hezbollah continued to arm itself and rearm itself with the help of Iran. They refused to disarm. They refused to give up their arms and give it to the Lebanese army. And they immediately started taking over South Lebanon. And of course, unfortunately, the world and the world powers, primarily the Western powers, were too weak, or you can call it apathy or whatever it is. They never did anything about it. They complained, loud complaints, but nobody did anything about it. And so that continued the tensions between Israel and Lebanon. And also, with the Israelis withdrawing, Hezbollah suddenly started saying, "We won the war. We won the war. We're the power. We're the power brokers in Lebanon," and they further consolidated their position in the Lebanese government. And that basically has been the case up until the past couple of years.
Sure. And it emboldens Iran as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. This is so interesting, by the way. I love this. Thank you for sharing this. Continue, please.
So that took us to, let's call it the more modern times. And this was, now we're getting into 2018, 2019, 2020, constant battles between Israel and Lebanon. You've had now in 2011, going back a little bit, there was uh, a lot of freedom movements were popping up all over the Middle East. And these were kind of encouraged by US administrations because they believed that if these freedom movements would pop up, that all these dictatorships around the Middle Eastern countries would fall apart, democracy would flourish. Um, and Obama was president at the time, and he was encouraging a lot of these movements. Uh, and it came down to pretty much the U.S. government believing firmly that democracy could flourish by spreading all over the Middle East. So first you had it started in Tunisia, the Tunisian government fell, then it spread into Egypt, and the Egyptian government fell, and then it spread through a number of other countries, eventually hitting Syria, out of all places. In Syria, the government did not fall. The government chose to fight, and they started slaughtering all the people that were demonstrating against the government, and that threw Syria into a civil war, a protracted civil war that also it started in 2011 and it went up until 2000. Excuse me.
God bless
Excuse
you.
me. If I can.
God bless you. So, Michael, and you're referring to the Arab Spring for
Yes. Yes.
yeah. And
So,
please.
sorry about that. So Syria fell apart also, and with the Syrian, call it revolution or civil war, then you had a few million that actually migrated into Europe, and you had about a million that now migrated into Lebanon. And that further created problems because it was straining the Lebanese economy. The Lebanese government could not afford to set up all these camps and feed the people. And of course, unrest was creating more unrest, was creating more unrest. And it continued the pattern that's existed throughout the history of Lebanon.
Just continues to weaken the government and the
That's
corruption
right.
sets in and it's
That's
just
right.
such a mess.
That's right.
Do you
So
go ahead?
sorry, going back to the this sectarian divide that never really changed. Um, Now you had a whole bunch of, you had the Maronites, you had the Druze, you had the Sunnis, you had the Shiites, who, while they were running the government, but they all continued to try to benefit for themselves. And they were doing it through a lot of corrupt ways. So that created rampant corruption in the government, outside the government, in the business community. And again, all the efforts since 1990 to around 2020, during those 2 decades where they started building up Lebanon again with all the Gulf, Arab Gulf resources that were coming in, the banking industry was starting again. They rebuilt Beirut, they built most of Lebanon back. It started actually becoming a very nice, beautiful country again, and businesses started to flourish. But now those societal problems never really went away. And the corruption was rampant. The government was dysfunctional. It was ineffective. At one point, the between 2022 and 2024, the president of Lebanon resigned, and they couldn't even replace the president because at that point, Hezbollah had become an integral part of the government itself, not just in parliament. They were part of the actual cabinet. And they blocked every president that was chosen, they were blocking. So, about for a period of 2 or 3 years, there was no president, there was no functioning government, the economy was falling apart,
Hmm.
it was practically bankrupt. And then you had this major event that happened. Sorry, here, let me just go in here in 2020. I don't know if everybody remembers, but back in 2020, there was a massive, massive explosion in Beirut. This was near the port of Beirut. at the heart of the business community. It was a very large storage facility that was storing ammonium nitrate. And nobody at the time knew who owned it, what caused the explosion. And they had some investigations and they got down to the bottom of it. It was ammonium nitrate that was held by Hezbollah. They were looking to use it to create weapons, put them on missiles to be able to use against Israel. They mishandled the storage aspect of it, and that created issues. I don't know the scientific reasons for it, but that triggered a massive, massive explosion. Actually, I remember watching this on television. It looked like an atomic bomb with a mushroom cloud that went over the entirety of Beirut, and it destroyed a very large part of the port of Beirut. It destroyed anywhere from, I think it was like 77,000 apartments. There was about 200,000 residential units as a whole. A few hundred people got killed. Around 300,000 uh, residents of Beirut were completely displaced. They had to move to other parts of the country because they lost their homes. And it just created a massive, massive economic problem because a lot of businesses were destroyed. And the government just didn't have the wherewithal or the resources or the will to get to the bottom of this, to the problem, identify who the culprits were, despite all the investigations. And that exposed the ineptitude of the government and exposed how paralyzed they were. A lot of people really knew what was going on, but just did not want to come out and talk about it because they're afraid for their own, they were protecting their own selves. And so that created a huge round of political unrest because the population in Lebanon were so angry and they were demanding that the government take some action, but there was no government. There was no functioning government.
It was a
And
failed state.
that's right. It was a completely failed state with a bankrupt economy, and there was just no functioning. In the meantime, we got to, unfortunately in 2023 with the October 7 massacre on the Gaza-Israel border. And that was on October 7th, 2023. On October 8th, Hezbollah decided to join the attack by bombing Israel with missiles. And that went on for, as you all know, the war between Israel and Gaza and Hamas lasted for just about 3 years, and or 2 years actually, up until last summer. And during this time, Hezbollah kept attacking Israel, supposedly to join the front and surround Israel. But they really did it haphazardly. Interestingly enough, when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, they were hoping that Hezbollah would join in a massive way, attack Israel from the north, and they were hoping that the Islamic regime would join with their barrage of missiles, and that everybody would surround Israel. They wouldn't be able to handle it, and they were so confident that they would be able to destroy Israel. But much to their surprise, the Iranians did not join the war. And Hezbollah, while they did attack, and they started, with a barrage of missiles, daily barrage of missiles on northern Israel, it was not what Hamas was hoping for. And you may all remember in late, I think it was October, November 2024, when suddenly there was this pager attack that came out of nowhere. And what that was, to refresh everybody's memory, um, Israel had, over a period of about a decade, secretly planted these pagers. And because they had convinced the Israeli Mossad through a variety of these dummy companies that they had set up in Japan and in Western Europe, they convinced Hezbollah that it would be too risky for them to communicate to all their soldiers and all their militia through cell phones because it would be open for Israel to be able to track
Mhm.
where people were and what they were talking to each other with. So they convinced them that instead they should use these pagers. And they actually sold them the pagers, and all these pagers had embedded in them tiny, tiny C4 bombs, which could not be detected. And Israel, for 10 years, was waiting for the right moment to basically trigger these bombs. And though what would happen was that a specific message would come in on their pagers, the people would actually pick up the pagers and press a button to get the message, and of course the pagers exploded. And in one day, thousands of Hezbollah militia ended up either getting maimed and a few hundred actually got killed. And with that one action, Hezbollah, as a military force, literally fell apart. And that created a lot of fear amongst the militia and the leadership of Hezbollah. They didn't know what to communicate with each other. So they stopped using those pagers and they decided that they would use walkie-talkies instead. What they didn't know was that the walkie-talkies were also planted with bombs. And a few days later, when everybody switched over to the walkie-talkies, the ones who weren't maimed or dead, and those exploded. And it caused further damage. And by then, it had created so much fear, so much psychological stress, and so many people were injured or killed. And it really put Hezbollah in a completely different trajectory because it just made them powerless. That followed with major attacks into Lebanon by Israeli Air Force. They started bombing a lot of the tunnels. They started bombing where all the storage facilities were for those missiles and the armaments. And then they started bombing this district in Beirut called the Dahiyya district, and that's where all the Hezbollah leaders had their headquarters and were meeting. They destroyed the Dahiyya district. They managed to assassinate the head of Hezbollah, and of course, by then Hezbollah started to fall apart, and the rest is all history.
Right. And on that, not to contradict anything you're saying, because everything you're saying is wonderful, very historically accurate. I really appreciate it. But I don't want anyone to be under the false illusion or the illusion that Hezbollah is completely weakened in Lebanon. They still have a lot of money from the IRGC. There's rumors that there's a 200,000 plus missiles still left to be located, an underground tunnel. So there's still a lot that has to be dealt with. And, the Lebanese people are exasperated with all of this. And I'm sure Israel, who is constantly fighting all of these wars, has got to be tired with all of this as well. So there needs to be an uprooting of Hezbollah. Lebanon needs to be unshackled from Hezbollah. And so I don't want people to think this like a false victory when there's still so much left to do, right, Michael?
Oh, there's definitely a lot left to do. You know, the number you were talking about, the 200,000 missiles, it's estimated that Israel managed to destroy more than half of them. But nobody really knows what the final number is. And like you said so aptly, unfortunately, the Iranian government continued to try to rebuild Hezbollah. And but again, we all saw last summer in the first war between Israel and Iran, over a 13-day period, the Iranians were counting on Hezbollah to come to their rescue and attack Israel, and they didn't. And the reason why they didn't was because they were just so disoriented. They were very tired, and they were just not able. If anything, they were afraid to join Iran and come to their support. But yet again, we had that war that stopped, a ceasefire was declared, and things went back to normal. Everything leading back to this January, with the massacres on the streets of Iran, and of course Donald Trump coming in and saying, help is on the way, blah blah blah, and Donald Trump being who he is, and of course Bibi Netanyahu being who he is. They are very strong leaders, and they ended up delivering on what they promised the Iranian people. They attacked Iran 3 weeks ago. We're right now in a large, very large war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And but what do we see? Hezbollah joined the war, and they started attacking Israel again. So now Israel is fighting on two fronts. They're bombing Iran, and they're also bombing Lebanon again. They're still bombing Beirut. They're destroying a lot of their capabilities. And, it's an ongoing conflict, unfortunately, and nothing is ever final in the Middle East because the Middle East is the Middle East and things will never change.
Never
But
say never.
exactly. But fortunately right now the trajectory looks like it's positive. You've got a lot of dynamics at work. I personally hope and I think it is going to happen eventually. The Iranian regime is going to be toppled. Reza Pahlavi, who is the crown prince, the son of the Shah of Iran, will hopefully go back and start a transition for the country and take it to democracy, because the government will be defeated. I don't believe that the United States and Israel will stop this war. We are at the point of no return. The Iranians won't stop it. The regime won't stop it because at this point it's an existential matter for them. They're either going to win or they're going to lose. There's no way around that. And the people in Iran are sitting in the background. They're waiting for that green light from the Israelis and the Americans to go out on the streets and revolt again.
Yep.
And that is going to happen. And
Yep.
I think it's going to happen very soon.
Yep.
But in the meantime, Hezbollah also is further weakening with their latest attacks on Israel because the Israeli military is very, very powerful. For three years since October 7th, they've been fighting a seven-front war, and they can even do more than that.
Yeah.
So we'll
So,
see. We'll see what happens.
well, well, thank you for everything you're sharing. I feel like I need to take a deep breath and just release like there's just so much war, and it's just heartbreaking. And the people of Iran continue to need our prayers. That goes without saying. And now the people of Lebanon, people of Israel, they need our prayers as well. And they need strategy. They need strategy for how to get free spiritually. I'm talking spiritually, and Michael is talking logistically. And so, Michael, we touched on so much of the history. We touched on all of these different problems. I know we're right around 2025 now. You're going to talk about the president who comes in Lebanon. So
Yeah,
please talk about him. And then, after you finish with the historical overview, tell us what it's going to realistically take for Lebanon to become stable, to be fully sovereign and economically viable again in your esteem.
sure. Well, like I said earlier, the trajectory is positive right now with all the dynamics. You've got the Syrian government, which was toppled back in 2024. So now you have a new government in Syria, and the alliances are shifting there. Despite the fact that the new leader of Syria was originally from with ISIS. He seems to be doing the right thing. There might be peace between Israel and Syria. He's got a good relationship with Donald Trump. And he's also going against Hezbollah. So that Syrian factor is no longer there. That's cut off the Syrian influence from Lebanon. Like you said, in 2025, or actually it was 2024, I'm sorry, finally Lebanon was able to elect a new president. His name is Joseph Aoun. He is now with with the way Hezbollah has been marginalized to a certain extent. It's given him more power. He's become a lot more assertive and is now demanding that Hezbollah disarm, which is exactly what Israel has been demanding all along. He is also demanding, along with the US and Israel, that they not only disarm, but that all the arms go to the Lebanese army and perhaps even some of the militia who are vetted and who are, call it salvageable, that perhaps they could join the army. But suddenly the entire country is openly criticizing Hezbollah. They're not afraid of them anymore because they see that Hezbollah is not the power that they thought they were. And in addition to that, the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government have been indirectly talking to the Lebanese government, putting a lot of pressure on them to diminish Hezbollah and put sort of the parts of the puzzle in place to be able to start a peace process and eventually reach a peace accord between Lebanon and Israel. As I said earlier tonight, um, there really has been no reason for Israel and Lebanon to be enemies. Okay. Yeah, generally the population has been sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinians because they're Arabs. But there are very minor border issues. There was a maritime issue that was resolved in 2024 by the Biden administration, where they mediated, and there was an agreement, and they demarcated the maritime border between Israel and Lebanon. Why was that necessary? Well, over the past decade, major gas fields were discovered in the Mediterranean Sea. And that's the Israelis were able to take advantage of that. They built all of these offshore gas facilities. They started taking out the gas and they started selling the gas to European countries. They're also selling a lot of their gas to Egypt. So that's generated billions and billions of dollars for Israel. The Lebanese are sitting there and they're like, well, we also have the Mediterranean. And, so there was a big fight between Israel and Lebanon about where the borders were because the Lebanese wanted to also start participating and build, sort of building their own offshore capability. So the fact that the United States was able to mediate that and finally demarcate that border put Lebanon in a position where they can now sort of partake in that endeavor. Now, the best way for them to do it is to kind of work in cooperation with Israel and work and gain from the successes that Israel has already done. But they can't do that if they're not at peace with Israel. So the trajectory needs to change, the psychology needs to change, and that we're starting to see the seeds of that right now. The Lebanese government is openly saying that they're interested in reaching a peace accord with Israel. And I think if they finally do that, it's really going to put Lebanon in a different place. Um, we had the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration, and with that came not just the original peace with Egypt and then the peace with Jordan, but then we Israel made peace with the United Arab Emirates, made peace with Bahrain, made peace with Sudan and with Morocco. So that opened up a lot of opportunities. And we all see, right now the UAE has a very close relationship with Israel. They're doing so much together from an economic perspective. And the Arab states are starting to smell that. They're starting to see that their main enemy is not Israel. It's actually the Islamic regime in Iran. And they're all looking to Israel to even, in essence, create this umbrella of military protection over them because they realize that Israel is by far the preeminent military force in the Middle East. And of course, with Trump coming in for a second term, he's also pushing Israel to become the dominant force in the Middle East so that the United States can disengage and concentrate on other parts of the world, primarily to be able to concentrate on what? USA, USA first, MAGA. So that's the major philosophy between MAGA. And so all of those elements are coming into place. So what you really need right now is the will and desire without the undue interference
Mhm.
of Hezbollah. And the only way you're going to really take away the power of Hezbollah is by destroying the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary um, uh, Corps of Iran, and the Islamic regime. So hopefully, when you have that domino falling, the Hezbollah domino will fall. And of course, with that, of course, we've had Hamas that has lost a lot of its power, and you got the Houthis in Yemen, which are very quiet. Why are they quiet? Because they were defeated. So if that happens, if Lebanon is able to reach a peace accord with Israel, they'll get a lot of economic benefits, they'll get a lot of trade benefits, they'll be able to perhaps do a lot with each other with regards to the strength that Israelis have as being a startup nation and the technologies. These are all very smart people. They're very smart people, and their
Very
talent has been
educated.
wasted for decades, you
Yes.
know. Um, and if they are able to cooperate on the gas fields, that'll bring in billions of dollars into the Lebanese economy, and they'll be able to rebuild the country. And I'm convinced that if this does happen, Lebanon will permanently get into a different trajectory because their their the countries that have traditionally supported them, all the Gulf states, are already engaging with Israel. And that'll open the door. Hopefully Saudi Arabia will come into the picture. Maybe at some point Qatar will come into the picture as peace will start spreading and Iran comes into the equation as not as the troublemaker in the region, but as the next major power that can add the economic benefits of cooperation and peace and prosperity in the Middle East. That will directly affect the destiny and the plight of the people of Lebanon.
This is incredible. I'm hearing in my head this is like the Cedar Accords. And I think, Michael, as we wrap up, um, I believe everything you're saying. If this happens, if Israel and Lebanon can work together and yes, work in the gas fields in the Mediterranean together, and Israel can come by their side and show them how it's done, and they can start making the billions of dollars, then they'll start having, the psychology shift in the nation. They'll develop more of a national pride, and then we'll start to see that sectarian identity, which has been strangleholding the nation, start to dissipate and lose its power. And then there'll be more of a national identity that takes place. And that's really what
Yes.
we need. I call that the kingdom culture shift. And I believe that Israel is going to hold a major key in being the catalyst and being instrumental in helping Lebanon to get there.
I love that, Lou. You coined a great term over there. Okay, the Lebanese need to start becoming Lebanese, not Shiite, not Sunni, not Christian. They need to rebuild that national identity and take their country to the next level because they're very, very well educated and competent people. Um, I would like to just add a request to you and to your audience. Pray, pray for the people of Lebanon. Pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the people of Iran. Pray that the United States and Israel are able to effectively defeat and destroy the Iranian regime, which has been spreading terrorism, not just regionally, but globally. And pray that the Arab people, the Iranian people, and the Israeli people are all able to coexist in peace, in prosperity. I've always said, ever since I was a child, I used to always say, if you take the brain of the Israelis and the capabilities that they have, combine that with the financial resources of the Arab countries, put them all together, the Middle East can become a massive paradise that you cannot compare because they will have the ingenuity, they will have the ability, and they will have the financial resources without depending on foreign aid to create such an economic powerhouse that will really start to become, call it a competitor to the United States, to the European Union, to the Russian bloc, and to China, and to become a powerhouse that will be able to add to the world rather than become a thorn in the side of the world for decades and decades, the way it's been.
Very well said, Michael. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the Kingdom Ecclesia of America and for sharing all of this really informative information. What else can I say? Informative information. This has been amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you. Honored.
Alrighty. Well, we're gonna wrap up now. So, Ekklesia, check out this video, share it with friends, and then pray for us as we're writing these decrees and the prayers. And then let's hit it hard. Let's pray for the people of Lebanon. Let's pray for the people of Iran. Let's pray for the people of Israel and throughout the Middle East. Remember what the Bible says. When Job prayed for his friends, that's when the Lord brought healing and deliverance to him. Okay, so this is a kingdom principle that we're following. And so we are praying for our friends throughout the world, the other nations of the world. And as we do so, God is going to bring more healing and more deliverance for our nation. Okay, so definitely be on board with this. We need you. We need you. Your voice matters. Your voice carries kingdom authority. So be tuned and stay tuned for Cedars of Lebanon, Operation Cedars of Lebanon, Part 1 and Part 2 to come out over the next few days and the upcoming weeks. And take your time to pray it, decree into it, and share it with others, and share this video as well. Thank you all so
Right.
much.
Right before you wrap up, can I just add one more request for a prayer?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pray for Donald Trump. He is our president and he is a great president. Pray for Bibi Netanyahu. Pray for Reza Pahlavi in Iran and pray for Joseph Aoun in Lebanon.
Yes.
Those men need a lot of our prayers because they're the brave men that are fighting this fight in addition to our armed forces.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
100%. Thank you for
Thank you.
saying that. Thank you for
No,
mentioning that.
thank you.
Okay, well, that just about wraps it up for today. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Happy Persian New Year, Shabbat Shalom, and
Shabbat shalom.
happy spring, everyone. And Michael, thanks again. We really appreciate having you here. God
You're
bless.
very welcome. God
Love you.
bless.
See you in
Love
5 minutes.
you too. Let's
Gonna
have
hang-
dinner.
Let's eat now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.